All right, so what we're going to be looking at today is the absolute genius himself, the next Albert Einstein. Ben Shapiro, he's going to debunk 7 myths of democratic socialism. They're going to be pretty bad, and the main problem lies within a failure to understand what today's democratic socialism actually is. But I'm gonna have you guys check it out again. This one is not as cringy as the video that I talked about yesterday, where he was just going on. I think it was yesterday. I forgot. Where he was just spewing a bunch of bullshit about the Mercatus study and Medicare for all. But check this out. Check it out.
But when it comes to the Democratic Party, their actual policies have moved hardcore to the left. This is what Obama is recognizing, is that the Democratic Party has moved to the left. So again, their new three prongs are intersectionality, complete subjectivism when it comes to personal activity, even activity that affects others, and finally, and most importantly, an embrace of democratic socialism. And this embrace of democratic socialism is the one that's going to absolutely destroy them. Intersectionality alienates the middle of the country. It alienates white voters. The subjectivity alienates religious voters. And democratic socialism alienates anyone with half a brain, because democratic socialism does not, in fact, work. Now, in a second, I want to go through some of the myths that surround democratic socialism, because there's this new kind of narrative that's being put out by a bunch of folks on the left, that democratic socialism is different than socialism, that we ought to take it very seriously, that if you look at the United States, what really is missing is this sense of redistributionist justice, this social justice that we need to bring about. We need to rectify income inequality by moving toward a more equitably distributed resource base. That's what we really need. But that's not really what democratic socialism is about. What democratic socialism is about is a complete takeover of the economy. So let's jump into 7 myths. Okay, there are 7 myths about democratic socialism that are purveyed by these advocates of the new Democratic Party platform, the Ocasio-Cortezes and the Bernie Sanders. So first, they claim that democratic socialism is not the same as socialism. That is not accurate. So democratic socialism is the idea that it's going to be socialism, but we're going to vote for it. And therefore, it's not really socialism. Well, that's not what socialism means. Socialism is just about the idea, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, as ensured by nationalization and centralization of government resources and nationalization of industry. Socialist programs redistribute. Socialist economies abolish private property and nationalize industry in order to redistribute. It's important to differentiate these two things. So, for example, if you have a socialist welfare policy that takes money from some and gives to others, that is a socialist welfare policy. It does not mean you live in a socialist country. The United States is a capitalist country with socialist programs, right? So Medicare is a socialist program of redistribution. Social Security is a socialist program of redistribution. We lie about it and we say that it's you putting the money in and getting it back out, but it's actually a socialist redistribution program. Socialist redistribution programs are socialist. It doesn't make the entire country a socialist country. It makes it a capitalist country with a solid welfare base, which is still not ideal, but we have to be clear about what we are talking about. Right? Nationalized healthcare is socialized medicine, but Canada is not a socialist country. Canada is, in fact, a capitalist country with socialized medicine. It's an important distinction. We need to be clear about that. And when democratic socialists say that democratic socialism is different from socialism, not really. They need to be clear about what they're saying. Myth number 2 is that democratic socialism is not, in fact, use of force. So democratic socialists claim that they aren't for overthrowing democracy. They want industry to just be run by the people. So factories should be run by the workers, and industries should be run by the employees. How are you going to do that, though? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to go out and you're going to vote for the government to take over those industries and basically regulate them into the dust. Okay, that is, in fact, use of force. Just because you voted for the use of force doesn't mean that the use of force is not being applied. If Colton and I decide that we want to rob somebody else in this room, and so we vote on it, then yeah, you. If we decide that we're going to rob this young lady right here, then that's still theft, right? Even if we vote on it, that's use of force and that's theft, because I assume she's not going to willingly give me her wallet, and she shouldn't, because it's not my money. Okay, so the idea that democratic socialism is not force is, of course, very silly. And socialism always tends to degrade into force, because what happens if the people don't want socialism? What happens if the people vote against democratic socialism? What happens if they vote against nationalization of industry and quote unquote democratization of industry? What if they vote against that stuff? Well, if they vote against that stuff, then it must be because they are emissaries of the evil capitalist system that bred them, and so we must gulag them. We must send them out for re-education to the gulags, or we must liquidate the dissenters. Okay, third myth that is purveyed by these pushers of democratic socialism is that socialism is fairer. Right? They say socialism is more fair. The third claim that is made by advocates of democratic socialism is that socialism is fairer. Socialism is not fairer. It is deeply unfair. Fairness rests on the basic idea that you get what you deserve. This is why it's really fascinating. There are all these social science studies that demonstrate that people will go out of their way. They will harm themselves in order to punish people who they feel are cheating. So if you play, there are all these really interesting studies where they'll put a group of people in the room and you have a choice as to whether you want to sacrifice some of your own money to punish somebody else in the room, or whether you want to keep your own money, or whether you want to grab somebody else's money. And people who grab other people's money are immediately hit with people who will spend their own money in order to punish those people. Human beings have an innate sense that it is wrong to take other people's money without proper justification and without any right to that money. Socialism seeks to destroy consequences for actions. Charity is based on the idea that we ought to help people in need. Socialism is based on the principle that need creates additional rights. This is a very, very different thing. Charity is about my capacity to give and about my obligation to give. Socialism is about the idea that if I am poor, I now have additional rights that I did not have when I was not poor. Right? Simply by virtue of becoming poor, I now have the ability to steal your wallet. So when I wasn't poor, if I stole your wallet, you would have said that I was a criminal. But now that I am poor and I steal your wallet, well, that's just socialism. Okay, that's deeply, deeply immoral stuff. Okay, fourth claim that democratic socialists make is that socialism was not present in the USSR or Venezuela or Cuba. This is what we call the no true Scotsman fallacy. Right? Anything that is bad isn't something that you did. Right? Any communist country that ends in murderous tyranny isn't actually communism or Marxism. Those are just misapplications of the rule. We've never actually tried real Marxism. If we tried real Marxism, you'd actually probably like it. This is an argument that losers make with regard to dating, where a girl says, I don't want to date you because I've seen how you date other people. You're like, right, but you haven't tried it yet. If you tried it, then it would be completely different. Your life would be so much better if you dated me. Even though you saw how like I used to dine and ditch on my prior girlfriend. That wasn't the real me. Once you get to know the real me, you'll understand that I pay for the best dinners in town. If you believe that guy, you're an idiot. And if you believe socialists who say that USSR, Venezuela, and Cuba are not socialist, you are also similarly an idiot. Okay, the fact is that all of these countries are stated Marxist countries. They all ended the same way because when you take socialism to its ultimate extreme, which is nationalization of all industry and shutdowns of private industry through use of government force, you end up in a pretty awful place pretty quickly. Which brings us to the fifth claim that democratic socialists make. And this is the claim that they are using most often right now. That is the claim that socialism is what makes Nordic countries awesome. So what they will say, you'll hear Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren all say that when they say socialism, what they really mean is Norway. They don't mean Venezuela, they mean Norway. They don't mean Cuba, they mean Denmark. There are a few problems with this. Okay, the big problem is that, again, they are conflating socialist redistribution programs with socialist economies. Denmark has socialist redistribution programs. We have to assess whether those are successful on their own merits. Denmark is not a socialist economy. Denmark is a freer economy than the United States. It has higher tax rates. That's the redistributionist part. But in terms of business regulation, in terms of capacity to attract foreign investment with free markets, Denmark is significantly more free than the United States. In fact, in 2015, Denmark's prime minister explained, quote, I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. This is exactly right. The Heritage Foundation, a right-wing source, this is their ranking of economic freedom. Switzerland, right, ranks 4th. Denmark, 12th. Sweden, 15th. The Netherlands, 17th. The United States, the evil, rapacious, capitalist United States, ranks 18th in economic freedom, according to the Heritage Foundation. Norway, that socialist hotbed, ranks 23rd. What made all of these countries wealthy, by the way, is the fact that they are capitalist and that they were more capitalist in the past. Capitalism makes countries wealthy. Socialism simply takes all that wealth and redistributes it, shutting down industry in the process. And here's the proof that all of these countries were doing well long before they had socialism. The proof is that by statistics, this is the case. Number one, by statistics, the case. Number two, if you take all these people from Denmark, from Norway, from Sweden, and you actually transplant them to the United States, they have higher incomes in the United States than they do in all of these other places. They actually earn more and they do better economically. So the idea that socialism is what creates awesomeness in these cultures is not right. Okay, culture created awesomeness in these cultures, and then socialism was a follow-on that has actually tamped down the economy in these various countries. When you take that culture and you transplant it to a free country like the United States, where tax rates are lower, then all of these cultures thrive in the United States as well. Now, Nordic countries do have high levels of social services because they charge exorbitant taxes. Denmark has a 60.3% tax rate plus a 25% national sales tax, which is why everything costs an arm and a leg in Denmark. Between 2007 and 2015, not surprisingly, Denmark experienced a 5.5% decline in real GDP, which is comparable to the decline in growth in Spain, which essentially went bankrupt during the same period. The natural result was the election of a center-right coalition in Denmark. Sweden, another supposed socialist paradise, grew because of capitalism. According to an economic scholar named Nima Zananjanji, who is from Norway, between 1870 and 1936, Sweden enjoyed the highest growth rate in the industrialized world. Between 1936 and 2008, the growth rate dropped to 13th out of 28 industrialized nations. Between 1975 and the mid-1990s, Sweden dropped from being the 4th richest nation in the world to the 13th richest nation in the world, and that is a direct result of restrictions on the economy and redistributionist programs. Norway, which is the left's favorite country these days, they moved on from Denmark and Sweden because both of those places have elected right-wing governments now. Norway is propped up by an enormous oil find off their coast, and even their nationalized oil companies, which are now used to prop up their social welfare programs, those companies run along private lines in that the government basically is a major stockholder in these companies, but it's not just government appointees who run the companies. It's people who are supposed to run these along profit lines. The government is not actually allowed to intervene in policy in serious ways in the Norwegian oil industry. It's also worth noting that in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Norway, the top 10% of wealth owners hold between 65 and 69% of all wealth in those countries. That's actually not that much lower than in the United States. All of these countries were significantly more robust economically before they started with their socialist nonsense. And the idea that high life expectancy in Scandinavia is an outgrowth of socialism is not true. In 1960, Norway had the highest life expectancy in the OECD, followed by Sweden, Iceland, and Denmark. By 2005, the gap between Scandinavian countries and the UK and the US had actually shrunk considerably. That's after the implementation of socialism in a lot of these countries. Also worth noting, you can't just take the socialist programs of Norway, which may work for a country of 5.3 million people, and apply them to the United States, where there is not the same level of cultural cohesion, cultural homogeneity, and a history of exactly that sort of cohesion and homogeneity. The population of LA County alone is double the population of Norway. You can't just take a program that works for 5 people and apply it to 5 million and expect it to work exactly the same way. Okay, final 2 myths about democratic socialism. So, we are also hearing that democratic socialism is the solution when it comes to the medical industry. What we really need is to nationalize our healthcare system. Now, let's be clear. There are lots of different government schemes with regard to medicine. America's scheme does kind of suck, okay, because it is not a free market system. The great lie about America's medical system is that it is free market. It is not. It is the most heavily regulated area of American life. The profit margins for insurance companies in the health insurance industry are like 2%. They're not that high. And one of the reasons that the health insurance system sucks in the United States is because of employer-based insurance programs, which were crammed down by the government in the 1950s. Basically, in the 1950s, we had wage controls. And in order to edge around those wage controls to give people raises, companies started paying for their employees' health insurance. But there's no reason that your health insurance should be tied to your job. Really, you should just be paying for your health insurance yourself. That's what happens in Switzerland, which is probably the world's most successful healthcare system. The way that Switzerland works is that you are mandated, just like Obamacare, you are mandated on an individual level to buy your health insurance, but there's no employer-based insurance in Switzerland. Plus, they penalize you pretty heavily if you don't buy health insurance. If you don't buy health insurance and then you get sick and then you go in for care, then they will force you not only to pay a surcharge of like 50% on your health insurance bill, they will also back charge you for all the health insurance you should have been paying for the last several years. Switzerland has a very, very robust program in force to force people to buy their own health insurance. It is also worth noting that all of these other countries that supposedly have wonderful healthcare systems have their drawbacks as well. Canada, of course, has very long wait lines. The same thing is true in the UK. In Australia, a large percentage of the population buys supplemental health insurance on the private market. So it's not just a matter of a universal healthcare system in Australia, and they're facing some significant financial issues because of the aging of the population. When people talk socialized medicine as the be-all, end-all, they're also forgetting that virtually all medical advances in the industrialized world are coming out of the United States. The U.S. is responsible for 44% of all new molecular entities, which would be the drugs that you actually take. And that those numbers would be a lot higher if not for government regulation from the FDA. We also drive medical innovation in other countries. The truth is that the American healthcare market, where people are able to charge what these drugs are worth, actually subsidizes the rest of the world. So when Canada collectively bargains with a drug company to provide them a certain number of drugs, They're able to do that because the United States is paying a higher price, because we are paying a higher price in the private market for all of that. So they're exploiting, all these drug companies are basically exploiting the private market and then making deals on the back end with all of these socialized medicine systems. If the United States went socialized medicine, the prices would skyrocket for everyone on drugs because nobody would be subsidizing this stuff anymore. Also, it is still true. If you've got the money, America is the best place to be for medicine. If you've got the cash, then America is still the best place to be. It would be even more like that if we would deregulate the system. Okay, final lie that Democratic Socialists tell is that capitalism is a giant failure. This is the dumbest argument of all. Capitalism is the most dramatic success in the history of the world. People living on $1 a day or less, that fell from about 27% of the global population in 1970 all the way down to 5.4% in 2006. That's an 80% decline. Poverty worldwide included 94% of the world's population in 1820. In 2011, it was down to 17%. Mortality rates for kids under the age of 5 declined by nearly half between 1990 and 2013. Virtually no American lives in poverty by global standards. So the third plank of the Democratic platform, which is this economic democratic socialism, it's a giant fail. It's a giant fail on every score. And the fact that it's even being considered by the Democrats demonstrates how far left they have moved right now.
All right, so here's the thing, is that this entire basically debunking is an epic fail because it relies upon the idea, and this is something that I've already gone into in depth, because it was something that I thought was very important and I wanted to talk about, but it was something that it's just too late to correct. And that is the difference between democratic socialism and social democracy, because we have twisted up the terms because of the use of Bernie. It's mainly Bernie Sanders who started using it, and so it became this sort of new term. And now Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is using it. And so when you have these two central figures in all of the news saying these sort of things as their ideology when it's not their ideology, it just means that the term is going to change. So the mistake mainly for this entire video is that he's presuming that democratic socialism, the democratic socialism that is advocated by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is actual democratic socialism, which, if you're paying any attention at all, you know that that's not true. And the reason is that, you know, obviously, if you are to have an opponent who is actually an advocate of democratic socialism, you're going to have a lot easier of a time arguing with that person. So that's why he has decided to use that to be the case. So here's the thing. First of all, there's a huge difference between democratic socialism and social democracy. I've made multiple videos on that, but I'm going to talk about that right now. So what is the difference between democratic socialism and social democracy? Now, democratic socialism, someone who was a democratic socialist was George Orwell. George Orwell actually went to Spain. He fought in the war. When it became anarchist Spain, he was part of that revolution, and he was a democratic socialist. So what democratic socialism is it is the economic system of socialism, which is the workers owning industry. That is the definition of socialism as an entirety. And so what democratic socialism is it is a system of socialist economy alongside a democratic government, meaning that there's a government that is elected by the people while also having a socialist economy in which the workers own the industries. Now, that is vastly different from both social democracy and what Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are advocating for. What they're advocating for and what social democracy is what every other European country has. You're talking about capitalist nations with social welfare states. That is what that is. And these welfare states make it so that it has some socialist programs, but it's not a socialist country. And Ben Shapiro talked about that. He said that, Canada has social programs, but that doesn't make them a socialist country. He's fucking spot on. He's spot on. That's exactly what we're talking about here. So Ben Shapiro is actually right on some things in that democratic socialism is not actually what Bernie Sanders and AOC are advocating for, but that those terms, the thing that he misses, and I feel like he knows this, but he's doing it on purpose, is that those terms have now become interchangeable. They're now interchangeable, meaning that people treat them as if they're the same thing because terms change. So that is the heart of the issue of the vast majority of this video. So he's talking about how, there is, these problems with democratic socialism, acting as if that is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are advocating for. So he goes on to talk about workers owning industry, and he knows that that's not what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are advocating for. It's very clear. They've never stated that in their entire fucking lives. They're out there advocating for Medicare for all. They're out there advocating for free college education. None of that is actual social, like full-on socialism as a country. None of that is what that is. Definitely not democratic socialism. Democratic socialism and the Democratic Socialists of America, if you look at their actual platform, because that's a party from decades ago, a lot of the original unions were part of the Democratic Socialist Party, and their platform is is one that is centered around the abolishment of capitalism, which is not what AOC or Bernie Sanders is advocating for. So like in his number 3 myth, I mean, there's no one advocating who's today a democratic socialist that you're talking about. No one's advocating for workers taking over industry. So they're not, and then he tries making the distinction between the USSR and saying that it's BS distinction because Republicans like to say Venezuela when that's not what's being advocated for. Now, the issue is that technically there would be a difference between the USSR and real democratic socialism because there's sort of this sort of thing like, anarchist Spain. And so there are differences like that come with these different left-wing ideologies. But what he's actually correct about is that they're closer than what we're talking about. So when I still call myself a social democrat. I don't call myself a democratic socialist, even though I align with those ideas that they believe in. So when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders say they're democratic socialists, they're advocating for the Nordic model. They're advocating for moving more towards, the policies of Germany and UK and Canada because they have more of a social safety net and more social programs. So they're nowhere near Venezuela. They're nowhere near that. Now, if you were to talk about actual democratic socialism, they would be a shit ton closer because the only difference between those two would be that there would be a democratic government instead of an authoritarian government that ends up happening in places like the USSR, but they would still have these socialist economies. So that's sort of the thing there. And again, it is a semantical error that they're going on about, but he's pretending as if it's not like an actual, like they actually believe in real democratic socialism, which is hilarious. Here's one thing also that I found really funny. So Ben Shapiro goes on to praise the Swiss system, and he's done the same thing with Singapore, as if it's like this amazing private system model, when I don't understand. He just praised the Swiss model for the government forces you to save money. And that's what I had someone try to tell me that one time about Singapore too. And the government is taking massive action to ensure healthcare for its citizens, whether it be by forcing them to save money or putting, in Singapore, sometimes they just straight up fucking put money in your account when you have to pay for that shit. So if you are somebody who bitches about taxes and different things like that, but the government's going to tell you how to spend your money or how to save your money, how would that not be something that to you that is authoritarian? I don't understand that. So I find it ironic that he's going to be on one side saying his wife is going to be a slave, which she's not, under a Medicare for all system, and then go on to say, praise this system that tells you what to spend your money on and how to save and where to put money. To me, that would be like a textbook example of authoritarianism if I were going by his ideology. So I just found that really funny. And I don't really understand why he's saying that, the only reason why other nations have cheaper pharmaceutical drugs than us is because we subsidize that. That's not true at all. I mean, that would really assume that the pharmaceutical industry is this, super, like, it's barely on its bones and we have to pay a lot so that they can give to cheaper. No, that's not how it works. They're making a shit ton of money. They'd be just fine making less. We have less because of, first of all, I mean, they lobby a lot. There was a bill that Bernie Sanders had opposed, and I think it was an amendment. Sorry, I forgot. But it was to allow drugs in Canada to be imported into the United States because they're way fucking cheaper. And of course, dumb fucks like Cory Booker voted against it, even though people like, I think it was John McCain who voted for it, and some other Republicans too. It might have been Ted Cruz. I'm not 100% sure. I kind of forgot, but that would be the solution because we have this lobbyist mentality. I mean, there's lobbying going on by the pharmaceutical industry, so they don't want to allow drugs coming in from Canada. They don't want to do that. They don't want to allow that because then they're not going to get as many sales. They're not going to make as much money. So that's the problem. So, and I guess if you have a shit ton of insane, like, unlimited cash to just blow, when you get some come down with some sort of a disease, you find out that you have some, I don't know, cancer or something like that. Yeah, I guess if you have an insane unlimited stash of cash, yeah, it probably is the best for you. And then finally, to finish off, I mean, the Seventh Amendment doesn't even apply to Democratic Socialists because, again, they're social democrats, which means that they're proponents of capitalism. They don't want the abolishment of capitalism. The democratic socialism that you're talking about is the original democratic socialism, not the 2016 to 2018 Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez democratic socialism that you're talking about. So the entire video was riddled with the fundamental misunderstanding of the premise in the first place.